G'day, and welcome everybody to episode 5 of the AustrAlien Podcast. As always, I am your host, TJ Hollis, and with me is the voice of the people, Mr. Sean Mills. How you doing, Sean? What's the poop?
Well, as you know, massive floods in our area, which is why this podcast is probably a bit later than normal. So, besides that, it's been pretty much wet.
Very wet, yes indeed. I played out of town last weekend as of recording, and just on the Friday, which was the day that the floods peaked, it took an hour and 20 minutes for me to get about 10 kilometres just inside town.
Wow. Yeah, I believe that.
That was from, not that it's going to be very interesting for anybody who's not familiar with Rockhampton, but that's from the hospital on Canning Street to the big roundabout just as it leaves town.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And just absolute gridlock.
Yeah, I had to go over that way last week as well for a doctor's appointment, and it was just chaos. But, the kudos to whatever level of government it was that actually built the road up so that we can get out of town and aren't cut off anymore. So we have a massive flood, and it adds an hour to our trip. So I think that's a pretty good payoff.
I can live with it, very much so. But I wanted to start this podcast off with a bit of a confession about how I have been feeling recently. And, Sean talks about the floods being a part of why we've been so delayed with this episode. But for me, the big truth is I've been going through a period recently where every time I read the news, every time I watch videos, read news websites, every time I even open Facebook or other social media sites and see the headlines and read the articles, I've been getting closer and closer to tears each day. And for me, that's been a part of why this episode has taken so long for us to get to record. So I want to start by asking you a question, Sean.
Go for it.
Do you still have hope?
As in hope for the world?
For the future of humanity.
For the future of humanity. For me, that's a two-pronged answer. Firstly, yes, I do have hope. I have hope for the future. You would know, and I don't know if I've ever talked about it on the show before, but I have a faith, a Christian faith, and my belief in God, and that does get me through when times are not good. On the flip side of that, if I was to compartmentalise and say, put that aside, I have hope. I don't know if I have... I don't know how strong that hope is that it's actually true. I have hope that we can, as humanity, pick our game up and just work out what the hell we're actually doing. In some ways, that hope is shaken when we elect governments like Trump. Or even to be bipolitical here, regardless of who's been elected in Australia in the last 10 years, they've been pretty weak governments because as people we don't have that faith in our politicians or in our political process, maybe, I don't know, that we keep having these, 0-seat, 1-seat majorities where nothing can get done, and that doesn't instill a sense of hope or anything in people because, if nothing's happening, we're just treading water. That's what I feel like Australia as a country is, just treading water at the moment. So, I guess without getting too deep and philosophical, I have hope, but it's not strong.
That's a fair answer, and as I said to you just previously when we were discussing the particular asking of the question, and how you wanted to answer it, I was, cards on the table. I'm an atheist, and I would never ask you to not be honest when asked a question like this, to eschew your faith.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I know that that's important to you, just like faith of all types is important to a lot of different people across the planet. And
yeah, yeah.
And even in our own country, like, it's not fair to ask somebody to put that aside.
Mm.
The reason I ask is I've found in the last month or so particularly, it's been getting quite strong, but even before that, probably for the last 6 or 9 months, that while I still have hope for a better world, my faith that it may happen is shaking.
Mm.
It's been shaken. And
yep.
in particular tonight, coming into this show tonight, when I was doing a bit more research just to make sure I was getting the latest facts and the latest developments on the stories that we're going to discuss, because this is not an easy show for me. This show has been very hard for me to come up with the topics and research the topics, and I get scared that it may be impossible to find the balances between the secular values of the secular humanistic values that are important, such as, everybody should have freedom of religion, freedom to express their sexuality, be they straight, be they gay, freedom to be transgender, freedom to follow their religion, be it Christian, be it Muslim, Hindu, Jew, atheist. But I get so scared that perhaps in the end all of these things may not be truly 100% compatible. Like in the past, we've always used the discussion of the bakeries in America.
Oh, yes, yep.
But the first topic that we're going to discuss here, and this is my segue into it, is that taken to the extreme, where in the Russian province of Chechnya, there's no other way to describe it, but there has been government-run and operated concentration camps for gay men, where, and I have to say allegedly, Chechen authorities allegedly have rounded up more than 100 men on suspicion of being gay and have been allegedly torturing and allegedly murdering them. This was all first reported by Novaya Gazeta, which is an independent Russian newspaper.
Not many of those left.
No, there isn't. It's based in St. Petersburg, which is pretty much one of the closest things that Russia has to a gay capital, because it has quite a large gay population there. But anyway, so allegedly what has happened is the government used agents to put up gay personals ads online and in newspapers, noted who replied to them, and then those people were either snatched from their homes or snatched from the street. And it was under this description of a prophylactic sweep.
Wow.
Now,
that's an interesting phrase for it, isn't it?
Absolutely. But according to the Novaya Gazeta, these, some of these men have been handed back to their families with the expectations that the families would perform an honour killing to remove the stain on their family's honour. Mm-hmm. Now, Chechnya is a very Muslim state. It's in a very weird thing where it's technically part of Russia, but it also has its own autonomy, and it's not quite a province of Russia, but it's not quite its own country either. And
I think it's referred to as part of the Russian Federation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Indeed. Now, their leader, Ramzan Kadyrov, he's previously drawn in international ire for trying to change the secular constitution to a Muslim faith-based constitution, and for forcing women to wear hijabs in public. But I'd just like to read a little bit of a quote here before we go any further. So, Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov's spokesperson denied the claims on the grounds that no one in Chechnya is homosexual. He has said, "You cannot arrest or repress people who just don't exist in the Republic," spokesman Alvy Karamov told Interfax. "If such people existed in Chechnya, law enforcement would not have to worry about them, since their own relatives would have sent them to where they could never return." End quote.
Wow. That I don't even know where to start with that.
Exactly. Exactly. And this is why when we were discussing this before, I didn't want to tell you too much about this before the show, because I really wanted to get your gut reaction here.
Oh, look, it's horrible. I don't even know where to start with that. It's just there's no words to describe what that actually is. If we're going to talk, basically putting them in concentration camps, that's goodness. I've got a. Well, to answer that, I'm going to ask you: do you think that Islam is compatible with the Western culture, with the Western world? And based on the fact that the Western world is fundamentally a Judeo-Christian basis, do you think Islam is compatible with that?
I believe that, and this is where it comes back to my hope and faith in humanity. I believe that yes, it is. Like, to start off with, it's very important to remember that Islam has actually, in itself, is an offshoot of that same Judeo-Christian group of religions. Mm-hmm. It is in itself another branch of that tree.
Yep.
And I believe that just as we've seen with Judaism, and just as we're seeing the big change with Christianity into being compatible with modern Western values, because let's not pretend that we're all the way there just yet with it. I do believe that some form of modernization of Islam is absolutely going to happen, and it's something that in a lot of countries is starting to happen. You meet the vast majority of your everyday Muslim people in Australia, in Western countries, are just as compatible with Western culture and Western values as most to the Christians you meet?
I see them as. I always say that a lot of Muslims in Australia that I've interacted with or that I see are Muslim in the same way that a lot of Catholics are Catholic. Look, basically, I got just a minor side point here that you actually agreed with something that Tony Abbott said once, which he after he lost the prime ministerialship and was trying to still be important, where he said that he believes that Islam needs a reformation.
I don't believe it needs a reformation in the same sense that the Catholic Church had a reformation.
Mm-hmm.
Because I believe it's already had its major big schism.
Mm.
I believe that in a number of foreign countries, and noticeably these are countries that don't hold core Western values to the same extent that we do in places like Australia and America and the UK.
Mm-hmm.
They will eventually find some sort of stasis between the two, I believe.
Yep.
I believe, but until then, this shaking up and that is happening, and is yet to happen as well. Because don't get me wrong, social media, in particular, and the internet, have allowed people not just in the Western world, but everywhere, to believe that they should have pride in who they are.
Mm-hmm.
To believe, for the gay populations, to believe that they should be allowed equality. For women to believe that they should be allowed equality. For people to believe that they should have democracy. That's not as much as it hurts, that's not an overnight thing. You are always going to have the people with the most to lose.
Yep.
Are always going to fight it.
Mm.
And it sucks. It sucks so damn hard. Because we're seeing these concentration camps in Chechnya. There was a video that came across my feed the other day of police in Indonesia, in Aceh,
yep,
the island of Aceh, where they busted into a hotel room where two men were having sex. And it is one of the most heartbreaking things I've ever seen. Because they're beating up, and there's this one person, one of them guys is just on the phone to his brother saying, "Brother, help me, help me. They busted us having sex, help me. They're going to kill us." And it scares me that this sort of stuff is still going on across the world.
Yeah. I think...
I have some other quotes. I have some other quotes from the Chechnya situation and the more I read them, the more I don't want to use them in the show.
Yeah, no, that's cool.
But I will say there are groups, if by some strange, crazy reasoning or happenstance that somebody who is in this situation in Chechnya or has family in this situation in Chechnya is listening, there are people who can help you. There are LGBT groups in Russia who are helping to get people out of Chechnya who need the help. There are groups of people across the world who are hammering the UN and hammering Amnesty International and the Red Cross to go in there and do something to help. There are people out there who can help. If you're anywhere in the world and you're in this situation, where even if it's just in Australia and you're being bullied for it, there are people out there who can help you. There are groups. And it's important that people know this. Anyway, to get on to the next topic.
Yep.
I wish I could say this was a lighter topic. I really wish I could say this was a lighter topic, but it's not.
Yeah. That's all right.
Dateline Beirut, Lebanon.
Yep.
And I'm sure that, this is being recorded on Wednesday, the 12th of April at 10:49 p.m. Just to date this. I'm sure there are a lot of people, just in saying that, know what I'm about to say. The town of Khan Sheikhoun in the Idlib province of Syria has been the victim of a chemical attack. Now, Khan Sheikhoun is run by Islamic rebels, not ISIS though. It's important to differentiate. These are Qaeda-linked militants and a number of other small groups. This is not run by ISIS, this part, but there was a bombing which has included chemicals which are assumed to be a combination of chlorine and the nerve agent sarin gas, which is a nasty little concoction.
Yeah. Well, that's actually historically that's what was used in the trenches in the First World War. That combination.
Chlorine and sarin. And sarin was also used. A lot of people might recognise sarin as being the nerve agent used in the Tokyo subway bombings.
Oh, that's right. Yep.
And also, I believe there was one in France at one point.
Yeah.
As well, a few years before that.
Yep.
Now, basically, a lot of the Western nations, the USA and the UK and the majority of the Australian government, are all claiming that Assad, who is the leader of the Syria, that he is the one that has ordered the drop of the chemical weapons. In saying that, it's important to also say that Syria is claiming that this is a rebel-led false flag operation. So Syria is claiming that the rebels actually used saw the bombing and used the nerve agents themselves just to make it look like the Syrian government was doing it. And that has been partially backed by Iran and Moscow, with Major General Igor Konashenkov of the Russian Defense Ministry. He's claiming that Syrian bombers struck an insurgent storehouse containing toxic substances that were going to be used in chemical weapons.
To be honest, I don't really believe the Russians in that one. Based on history, based on the fact that Assad has used chemical weapons on his people before, and under the Obama administration, Obama got a deal between Russia and got a deal with Russia that they would deal with it, that they would get rid of those chemical weapons out of Syria and Libya as well, but out of Syria. So I don't know if I really believe that. These are those things that we're never going to know. That's the problem.
Since you bring up the Obama administration with this, recently Sean Spicer, or Sean Spicer, I'm not actually sure which one it is.
Yeah, it'll be Sean.
Sean Spicer has denounced, he's Trump's spokesperson, by the way. He denounced Obama for not intervening after the 2013 chemical attack near Damascus that was attributed to the Assad regime. So I find it very odd that once it happens, the first thing he does is put the blame on Obama, on a previous administration.
That's the fallback position for the Trump administration, isn't it?
Interestingly enough, when it happened in 2013, Trump himself tweeted, and I quote, "President Obama, do not attack Syria. There is no upside and tremendous downside.
Yep.
Save your powder for another and more important day." End quote.
Look, Trump's tweet history is priceless. everything he does and says is contradicted by himself, but I think we all know that about him now. I don't want to talk about Trump. I think Sean Spice is not much better. I don't know. I mean, the upshot of this that we haven't talked about is obviously the US bombed in retaliation what they saw as an airfield, where it came from. So whether that was the right thing to do or not, don't know. Probably the only thing they could do if they were going to respond to it, it was probably the only option they had, because the Obama administration had talked to Russia and tried to get a more peaceful solution to it, but a lot of ifs in this statement. But if it was Assad, and if it was Assad, then I think the Americans did the right thing, but we'll never know. I can only assume they have better intelligence than I do on it.
That is quite possibly the truth. But in saying that right now, we've got this lovely quote from Sean Spicer, and I think you know what's coming, where in denouncing Assad, he has said, and I quote, "Someone as despicable as Hitler didn't even sink to using chemical weapons." End quote.
You just wonder what planet these morons dropped off, don't you? What spaceship took him up and sucked out half his brain? I just honestly, how can you be the press secretary for the United States of America and say Hitler didn't use gases, didn't use chemical weapons? I mean, really,
In saying that, he's apologised.
It's moronic.
He's apologised 3 times since then about that, and he's tried to explain that what he was saying was that Hitler didn't use chemical gases on enemy combatants.
Well, okay, is that true?
No, it's not.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I mean, I know in the First World War we threw a lot of, both sides, our side and the Axis people. Well, they weren't the Axis, but the Germans and whatever in the First World War threw, gas at each other, but mustard gas and all that. We didn't really have the trench warfare in the second, so I don't know. But anyway, that's besides the point. So. So you get me talking a little about history, TJ, and I love it, as you do too. So
Absolutely.
It's moronic. There's no other word to describe this. How moronic that sort of statement is. Fine, he apologised. Fine, he clarified it. Those words should never have entered his brain, let alone come out his mouth. Come on, This is the same administration. We have to remember this, that managed on Holocaust Memorial Day, managed to release a press that did not include any references to the Jewish people at all. But anyway, looking at the fallout in Washington for this, just briefly touching on it. Yep.
It's at the moment you've got Trump, who's claiming that the Assad regime is, quote, a political reality, unquote. Yet most of the prominent Republicans who are backing him are all calling for Assad to leave power, saying that if he doesn't step down, that the USA, once they're finished with the rebels, should put somebody new in power in Syria. Full stop.
Yeah, because that has worked so well for the US in the past. There's a track record of 70 years since the end of the war where the US have been propping up or putting in new dictators or rolling regime change and all that sort of stuff. And it's never, ever, ever worked. Those people are morons. There's a lot of morons on this program tonight. And those people are morons too. I don't like Assad, but he's got a government that is running the nation when it was, before this rebel stuff and ISIS and all that. But, he was the legitimate government, and he's got powerful allies in the Russians.
And Iranians.
And Iran. So, use those channels with the Russians in particular and lean on them to lean on him. That's how it should work. That's how things happen. That's how things get changed. Just going in and taking out a leader and putting in someone else. Well, look at Iraq. The problems in Syria today are because the US didn't have a transition plan for a new government in Iraq. So, same mistakes over and over and over. They're just not learning. People don't learn. People are stupid.
Well, as an addendum to this, I'm in thorough agreement with you, by the way.
Awesome.
But
as
an addendum to this,
yes.
The European Union is actually currently discussing whether billions of euros in reconstruction funds are going to actually be sent to post-war Syria or not, if it's still run by Assad. They're basically saying that, yeah, they've got billions of dollars in reconstruction funds if he's out, but if he's in, that's to be determined if Syria gets the money or not. It's then, going to be, oh, well, if he's in, do we give it to him? Yes, no? That's what they're literally deciding right now. So if, in fact, it was Assad that dropped chemical weapons, that gets my vote as a combination of the ballsiest and stupidest move I have ever seen.
Look, if that's a game changer, if he's using chemical weapons on his own people, then I think it's, humanity's obligation to, protect those people. And if that means he has to go, then he has to go. But we need to do it in such a way. I don't know how to do this. I'm not a diplomat. I'm not, important in those areas or wherever, but knowledgeable in those areas. But I just, if we're going to do it, we need to do it right. We need to have a government supported by their own people. That's the problem in Iraq. The government's not supported by their own people by and large. So, Assad was the legitimate government at the time. So if he's to be taken out, it needs to be taken out by his own people.
Agreed.
It's not our job, I say ours, I guess, universal Western world, to go into these countries and tell them how to run their own affairs. Now, where the EU is right in this, they're perfectly within their rights to hold any money, any funding or anything. That's not telling a government to change. That's not saying you must change your government. That's not, regime change or anything like that. That's just them going, well, if you don't make the right decision or what we think is the right decision, then we're not going to give you money. And, that's wielding economic power, and, maybe that will have the same, at the end of the day, it has the same results, but the process is better. That's how the process should be. Just
Absolutely.
saying, we're going to send troops in and wipe him out, that's just...
Absolutely.
Especially if the Russians aren't on side.
Oh, but the Russians are absolutely not on side.
And the Russians aren't on side. So if we have the Russians on side and the Americans and, Europe, well, that's a first, isn't it, to get all three of those groups to agree on something. But if they did, maybe that's a different story. I don't know.
But unfortunately, they don't. You have Russia, who is fully backing Assad, and you have the US, who, as much as Trump says it's a political reality that he's going to be there, most of the US government does not back Assad. And my personal worry is, are we running into Afghanistan 2.0?
Yep. Well, let's finish with 1.0 first, eh?
Oh, Well, actually, I should probably say Afghanistan 3.0.
Yeah, well.
Because 1.0 was back in the 70s, and that's the one that I'm
70s and
referring
80s.
to.
Yep.
And people forget that's where the Taliban and Al-Qaeda came from.
Yep, with American money.
They came with American money, American weapons, and American training.
It's exactly what I was saying about the Americans screwing it up every time when they want regime change. You know, they wanted regime change in Afghanistan. They wanted the Afghanis to tip out the Russians in that geopolitical contest that they were having at the time. And to do that, they poured money and weapons into the Taliban and all those groups that became those groups. And now we're fighting them. So they're shooting us with our own bullets. That's what it comes down to. It's ridiculous.
This is why, like when we discuss these two stories, this is why I asked you at the beginning of the show about hope and about faith in humanity. Because I personally believe, and I've been through this crisis of faith myself, but I do believe that we can get it right at some point, and I believe that it's important for all of us to remember that things may look horrendous right now in certain parts of the world, all across the world. You know, because you can't hold Western civilization up. You can't hold Australia and America up and say that they're perfect.
No.
You can't do that. There are bad things happening everywhere. There are good things happening as well. But I just believe that it's important for all of us to remember that things can and will get better.
Yeah.
As much as we hear all this stuff, we can't just hide it from it. We can't just click, I don't want to see this on my Facebook feed, on my Twitter feed. Because if we want it to get better, which we do, we can't ignore it.
Yeah. That's very true.
But anyway, this has been a very, very, very heavy episode.
It has.
And I want, to say absolutely thank you to everybody who stuck through our crisis of conscience with us.
Yep.
Because it is so very muchly appreciated. Anyway, as always, if you have topics that you want us to discuss, if you have questions for us, anything like that, you can find us on Twitter, or you can catch us on our Facebook page.
Yep.
And again, if you did enjoy this, please feel free to rate us on iTunes.
Yep.
Because that's how we get noticed, and that's how we can grow our listenership and our audience, and that's how we can hopefully get onto the new and interesting podcasts, the recommendations on iTunes, which is so very important for new podcasts, starting out podcasts.
Absolutely.
But anyway, once more, I'm TJ.
I'm Sean.
He's Sean.
I am.
And thank you very much for listening. And I just want to leave you one more quote, if I may, from fantastic journalist Edward R. Murrow. He was discussing the McCarthyism and communism in America, but I believe this quote really is applicable in so many situations these days. We will not walk in fear one of another. We will not be driven by fear into an age of unreason. If we dig deep in our history and our doctrine, and remember that we are not descended from fearful men, not from men who feared to write, to speak, to associate, and to defend causes that were, for the moment, unpopular. Good night. Thank you.